Check 1, 2. All right. I want to go ahead and thank you all for joining me on this Saturday morning, brother. Saturday morning. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And before we get started, I would like to welcome those of you who are brand new to Royal We Fellowship. In addition to that, if you would like to make a donation, because people have asked about this, please keep in mind that donations are inspired, not required. It is not a requirement that you donate, but if you would like to, you can donate through the link in the homepage on the banner. You will find a link there where you can make your offering if you wish to do so. Let's go ahead and open up in prayer. Father, our Father who art in heaven, how holy is your name. And your kingdom will come and your will shall be done here on earth as it is in heaven. And give us this day and each and every day our daily bread, and forgive us of our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. And lead us not into temptation, and deliver us from the evil that's around us. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started and jump right in here to today's lesson. We've been continuing on talking about Abram. He's left home and he's on his way, and he has overcome some hurdles. He has let go of his nephew Lot, who has gotten himself wrapped up in trouble in Sodom, and Abram went off to the rescue. Then the king of Sodom, for rescuing Lot and for defending Sodom, the king offered Abram gifts and to take monetary stuff and whatnot. And Abram said no. And we learned a valuable lesson about this, because what Abram was showing is that, listen, my sustaining comes from the Lord. I'm waiting on the Lord to fulfill his promises and to sustain me. And according to what Abram said to the king of Sodom, made it sound like, listen, if I take anything from you, you will be given the glory for taking care of me. And that's actually the words that Abram said. I made a deal. I've spoken with God about this, and I'm not going to take anything from you or anybody else, lest you be able to say that you made me wealthy. And Abram, in his covenant with God, knows that God wants to be a part of Abram's life. And Abram, in this, if you and I were to look at it this way, is going to be self-made. By God's divine nature, Abram is going to be self-made. You follow that? Some of us need to understand this. We need to get out of this this thought process that our wealth and what we have needs to come from other people. We can be blessed, no doubt about it. However, God wants to work with you so that you can become self-made, whether it is your passions, your goals, your dreams, whatever God has given you in life, you are to become self-made. And by self-made, what we're really talking about is that you're not making a deal with anybody who can say that they put you in the position that you're in, right? Now, we're going to go ahead and continue on. And today, we're going to be moving on a little bit further in the story now. Abram has already dismissed the king of Sodom, and they're continuing on. And now Sarai, which is Abram's wife, is starting to get anxious because she knows she knows what Abram has told her. And up until this point, we don't see that Sarai is having any of this direct encounter with God, the way in which Abram has devoted his life to having this direct encounter with God. But Sarai is there nonetheless. And being Abram's wife, she has not yet had any children. So she's having a hard time making sense of all of this. You have to imagine she's trusting her husband, Abram, who has pulled her out of her culture as well, back in Ur. And so she's going along with Abram, probably scratching her head, along the entire way of what is going on. Where are we going? We are wandering around. We're rejecting the blessings of other people. And you're telling me, Abram, that you're going to be the father of many nations, yet here we are, and I have no children. This is absolutely bonkers. And so it would seem, right? And so Sarai, Abram's wife, who had no children, started to grow impatient with the situation, which could be understandable if we're looking at it in very human nature. And this is the heart of humanity. This is our heart. We are very impatient people. How many of you would say that, yes, we can be impatient? And that's the narcissism in each and every one of us. We want what we want, and we want it right now. We typically don't like to wait. And we're going to see a lot of narcissism displayed in Sarai in this story. And because she was impatient with the situation, she did have an Egyptian slave named Hagar. She had a servant, right? It wasn't uncommon then for people to have servants and maidens or whatever you want to call them. Abram also had different servants, and I don't really believe that they were necessarily slaves as much as just companions to help with certain things that were going on, certain loads. It's kind of like a small community, if you will. And she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children." So she told her husband, "Go sleep with my slave. Go sleep with Hagar, and perhaps I can build a family through her." This was Sarai's idea. Now, how many of you right away would say that's not a very bright idea, right? It's not. It actually seems like a very knee-jerk reaction to a very stressful situation. Again, we're looking at Sarai following her husband, not knowing what in the world is really going on. They're poor. They don't have a whole lot. They're not poor. They're very rich, as a matter of fact, but they don't really have too much aim. They have not landed, so to speak. They're walking according to a promise. And how many of you feel oftentimes that you are walking according to a promise, but never quite arriving there? And that can be very frustrating, especially if you don't see the arrival, if you don't see where you're supposed to be. We're going to see this echoed throughout the scriptures as you continue on with Royal We Fellowship. We're going to get there again once we get to Moses when he led the mixed multitude out of Egypt. They were walking in the wilderness for what seemed like ever, right? Always given a promise, but never quite arriving. And this is where Sarai is, and out of frustration, she says, "Take my servant and let's get this party started. If you're supposed to have children, if you're going to be the father of many nations, then you better get to it, dude, right? Because I'm not helping out here. There's Sarai had no children. Both of them together had no children. So her following her husband based on these promises, she's like, let's get this party started, okay? Take my servant and here, have a child. See what happens. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. Now, watch this. This is very interesting. Abram agreed, and it seemed like Abram in the situation agreed without any much questioning or any dialogue as to, is this right? Is this, and it didn't even say that he had consulted with the Lord, which is what he's done with everything up to this point, right? He even refused to take wealth and riches from the king of Sodom, saying, no, lest you be the one to make me wealthy. I've made a pact with the Lord saying I will not take anything from anybody else. But in this issue, when his wife approached him and said, take my servant and have a child, sleep with her, he had no questions. I won't argue that. And I do not believe it was necessarily just a man thing, you know? Okay. All right. Sounds good. Thank you. I don't think it had anything to do with that. I believe that there's a reason that there was a particular piece about the situation, yet a confusing aspect of the situation too. We're going to see in this story as we continue on how God does take a lot of times what can be not very good decisions and turn it into ultimately his plan. How many of you know that God is the God over light and darkness, over good and evil? We're not there yet, but it does say this in Deuteronomy. This is going to make, this kind of conceptual thinking makes my mind hurt. It's going to make your mind hurt too. But when we think about how God has power and usually decisive matters over all, and a lot of times paves the way, knowing exactly how things are going to work out. We do not understand this, but we're going to see this in this case. Now, Abram agreed to what Sarai said, and he did he did take the Egyptian slave Hagar, and he slept with her. Okay? And she did conceive. She became pregnant. Now, when she knew, talking about Sarai now, when she found out that it actually worked, she found out that her maiden, her servant, was in fact pregnant, she became very bitter, very resentful, and she started to despise her mistress. This is the narcissism that we are seeing displayed, and we have to watch out. And we see this in narcissists, and when they do something to cause even their own idea. A lot of times they'll say leave, or but it's almost like it's a bluff. They don't believe it's really going to happen. And when something happens, especially in your life and in my life, they get really mad. They get resentful. How dare you? I didn't think you actually would. I didn't think it would work, right? So Sarai is experiencing this amount of envy that creeps up as a result of narcissism that's within the flesh. She starts to get very angry and bitter over her own idea. It was her plan that she presented with Abram. Maybe she wanted Abram to say, no, we'll wait on the Lord on this one, as he has been with everything else. No, I appreciate the idea, but we'll wait on the Lord. But no, it happened, and now she has a pregnant servant because of her husband. So not only is Sarai angry, we're reading in Genesis 16 here, and we are in Genesis 16, verse 5. Not only is she angry with her with her servant, but she's also angry with Abram. She said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering." Now, it's very interesting here that she's saying the wrong I am suffering. What is the wrong that Sarai is suffering in the situation? This is very important for you and I to understand, and this is the foundations of narcissism. This is what creates narcissism, is when we take that position that we are suffering, especially after having our own idea and having it work out, but we're suffering. What was her suffering exactly? Her suffering was the bitterness, the resentfulness, and the jealousy over the situation. Her suffering extends beyond that into the confusion of where they even were, feeling lost, feeling like they have nothing. This, from what we can see, there's two different ways to look at this. Abram in the situation was looking at everything going on as, I am going to trust in the Lord, that he is going to allow us to become self-made, and we're going to do this. She was coming from this place of, we're trusting, but I don't believe. It's not tangible. There's a lot that's missing here. And as a result, she was suffering because of that. And when she saw things working out for other people, she began to become very bitter, very rageful, very jealous, and very envious in the situation. This is a natural thing that this is the natural bit of narcissism that exists in everybody. Do you understand that? Do you follow me? Now, where narcissistic abuse comes into the situation is when that natural bit of jealousy, confusion, and rage, and anger, and misunderstanding forces somebody to become abusive. And in this situation, we can tell that Sarai started to go in that route of becoming somewhat abusive, because if we look down to, she started, blowing up at everybody. She despised her mistress, and then she came after Abram, her own husband. You're responsible for the wrong I am suffering. Okay? Narcissists do that. They'll look at you when they're in their narcissistic fit of rage, and they'll say, you're the reason I am suffering. Okay? And that's why they attack you. She goes on in verse 5 here, I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Now, Abram's response is, your slave is in your hands. This is verse 6. Do with her whatever you think is best. And so Sarai mistreated Hagar. She became abusive. Any type of mistreatment, you could easily say, is abusive. So Sarai became very narcissistically abusive towards Hagar out of her bitterness, out of her jealousy, out of her discomfort over the entire situation. Did Hagar do anything wrong? No. Hagar was doing what the servant was told to do. She could have probably said, no, I am not going to sleep with your husband. But so they were all, but keep in mind also, this is before the Mosaic law. This is before thou shalt not commit adultery. This is before any laws were in place. So it was a very, I guess, it was a time and a place where we can't really truly even understand, except we can connect with the humanity level. Outside of that, we cannot connect with the type of connection they had with God. It was different than what we have. Okay? We see this. This is a time in which, according to the ancient literature, God literally had encounters with these people, where our encounters are much different with God. Okay, so it was a different time, but adultery was not a thing. It did not exist, all right, as a part of sin. So what we're dealing with here is not necessarily a wrong legally, but we are seeing the human emotions of jealousy, anger, and rage and confusion that flare up, all right? So Sarai began to mistreat Hagar, and so Hagar ran, right? She's like, I'm out of here. I'm away. She went no contact. Hagar went no contact from Sarai and from Abram, probably thinking that it was absolutely crazy. What did she just get herself into? Now, an angel of the Lord caught up with Hagar, who was in a spring in a nearby desert. So there was Hagar. She was pregnant, and she was alone and isolated. And it was a spring that was beside the road to Shur. Verse 8, chapter 16. And the angel, and again, this goes back to what I was just telling you. Their connection with the Lord at that time was different. This is why it's very hard for us to put ourselves completely in this situation, because that world, even though it's the same world that we live in, it looked different. This, according to the ancient literature, is the time of rapid population. This is coming out of the flood. This is when, according to our understanding, the world was not even yet covered with people, and this was the effort to populate. And so there were the Mosaic law did not exist yet. Sin was not even labeled out yet. It was not a thing yet. What they had to go by was faith and their unique individual connections with God. And so Hagar, and I absolutely, according to what there says, they were able to speak with angels at this time. All right, they were speaking with angels. This also goes back to the idea of what we talked about in Genesis 6. I'm going to make a side note here. I came under a little bit of scrutiny because of the concept of fallen angels having inappropriate relationships with humanity in Genesis 6, right before the flood. They were known as in some conspiracy biblical theories, as the Watchers, who landed on a particular Mount Hermon, whatever, saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. The sons of God saw the daughters of men were beautiful and had children with them, and they born the Nephilim. And a lot of people say, no, there's no way. They're angels. They're different. But here again, we see, this is later on in Genesis 16, and we see that angels, in fact, were able to interact and actually physically talk to humanity. So if we take this and we also apply that, then it would make sense that it could have possibly been the angels, the Watchers in Genesis 6, that really contributed to the evilness and the wickedness. When we talk about the fallen angels, the ones who went against God. But at any rate, we see here in verse 8 that an angel approached Hagar, the slave of Sarai, and says, where have you come from and where are you going? Now, this is interesting. She was trying to get away from the narcissistic abuse of Sarai. She was being mistreated. And an angel says, where did you come from and where are you going? And in this case, the angel turned her around, saying, we see you. We know that you are going through this mistreatment. We know that you are going through this, but right now, this is a part of your plan. Now, watch this. That's not for all of us. That's not for all of us. So do not take this as somebody's telling you right now to turn back around and go back into the abusive situation. Okay? This is for this time only that we see. This is a very specific for this reason, and I'll share with you my thoughts on why. The angel of the Lord then told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. Okay? So notice that first, Hagar did the right thing by getting out of the abusive situation, getting away from Sarai, getting away from the narcissistic abuse. And she was on her own, going no contact, pregnant. She took that risk to run, to get out of there, to go no contact. And talk about being alone. A lot of us struggle to go no contact and be alone and be without the companion in life. She was really alone in a desert with nobody and pregnant. But the abuse was that bad that she got out. Okay, we've seen this before. King David, later on, he ran from King Saul, hid in a cave for a long time. No contact from abusive, hostile situations is very important, if for nothing else, to create distance between you and the abusive people so that you can start to find answers, so that you can start to pray about the situation, so that you can patiently wait. And that is what Hagar has done here. She ran and she hid. She fled from Sarai and from Abram until, and it doesn't say how long she was gone for. It could have been a year. It's empty. It could have been a year following verse 6. It could have been a long time. Could have been 2 years. Could have been, well, no, because she was still pregnant. Well, it could have been a long time. Could have been months, right? But the angel found her and wrestled with her on this concept and said, where have you come from? Where are you going? You're all alone. And now, and her response was, I'm running away from my mistress. I'm going no contact because of the abuse. I can't deal with it. That's when the angel told her and comforted her, saying, go back to your mistress and submit to her. And the angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. Now, if you notice, the angel gave Hagar the same promise that was given to Abram. You follow that? So there's a reason why the angel of the Lord said, go back and submit yourself to Sarai. Go back into the abusive situation. Go back. And a lot of people would say, no, it doesn't make any sense. Why would God want anybody to go into an abusive situation? Right? And why would anybody suggest go and submit? Because what the Lord was telling Hagar is, you are a part of the plan. You're a part of the covenant that I made with Abram. I told Abram that he would be the father of many nations. You are now a part of that as well. And you are going to be a mother of many nations. And that's exactly what has happened. So initially, not only Sarai, but also Hagar. Hagar in the situation has given birth and is now a mother to what would be a part of many nations through Abram. So in the situation, this is where we see the hand of God, how sometimes even in these situations where we don't understand it, and Sarai was upset and her narcissism got the best of her. But what they did not realize is that this is also part of the path that God laid out in order for Abram to become a father of many nations, of many tribes, of many people. These people all play a role. It had to happen. That tension had to build. That stress had to come. That frustration had to hit Sarai. Sarai had to give Abram the servant, so that she can also have children by Abram, which starts that process of Abram becoming the father of many nations. A lot of times, the promises of God do not make sense when we look at it on paper and we read it. But if God makes a promise, I'm going to make you a father of many nations, it happens in these different ways that can be confusing, but ultimately it makes sense. And now, the reason the angel had her go back and submit was for that reason, because she was a part of Abram's promise. That's the only reason that I believe the Lord sent Hagar back into the abusive situation, is based on a promise. And now Hagar had to live a sacrificial life just like Abram. Abram had to sacrifice taking things from the outside. He had to leave his culture. He had to do all this stuff in order to be the father of many nations. Hagar now had to submit into what seemed to be a somewhat abusive situation, yet that she had to live from the inside out. It was, I guess, if you would look at it this way, it was an ego-breaking moment for Hagar, where she thought that she would be treated like a wife, perhaps, of Abram. Look, I have his children. I should be treated like a wife. But in sacrificing, she had to say, okay, I will dismiss being treated like a wife. I will go back to just being a servant, but with a child, because I am going to be living based on God's promise, because God now spoke to me and said, my descendants are going to be uh, too numerous to count. So she grabbed onto that promise, and now Hagar began to live from the inside out based on her own promise. And through that, she was able to sacrifice in the situation because she was given that specific promise from the Lord. Okay. I'm going to read Genesis 16, now chapter 16, verse 11, and then we'll wrap it up here. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. It does not sound like a very good, it doesn't sound like a good boy, that's for sure. But what's interesting about this is that not only did the Lord tell Hagar, go ahead and go back and submit yourself to your servant because you are a part of Abram's covenant with the Lord. But the Lord also named this child, didn't even allow Abram. So Hagar and Abram didn't name the child together. The Lord took this child and said, I'm naming this child. And from this child, from Ishmael, we will see how later on, eventually, it's going to grow and split, and there are going to become many descendants as a result of that, all a part of Abram, again, being given that covenant, and it already starting to take form and to take progress. But what we see in this story of Genesis 16 throughout the verses is we see the way in which narcissism can affect each and every one of us out of our own confusion, frustrations, impatience, and misunderstandings. And it really comes down to our level of faith, and to everybody's been given a measure of faith to be able to make sure that we are doing the right thing, to pray about things, to ask for guidance on certain things. I believe personally that this was supposed to happen, that Hagar was in fact supposed to become pregnant. Perhaps because it seems that way. However, it could have been done in a different way. It could have been done with more prayer, more meditation on it, instead of just the knee-jerk thought of, here, take my servant and go forward and do this, right? Which causes a lot of problems in our life, right? I believe that one of the things that the Lord wants to work on all of our lives is patience, And with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for being here, being a part of Royal We Fellowship. Again, I would like to add that for those of you who would like to donate, you can do so on the banner of the homepage. It's not required. It is rather inspired. And we will be back next Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Central Time for Royal We Fellowship. Have a blessed weekend, everybody, and a blessed week. And we'll be back right here on Royal We Fellowship next week.